Many US e-commerce businesses will go bankrupt because of the tariffs, and it's very frustrating the way they were implemented. But the net result is going to be higher margins and better profitability for US e-commerce sellers over time. So let's start with the elimination of Section 321. So every year, $100 billion worth of goods are brought into the US tariff-free, primarily by Chinese sellers. Now, you might think, yeah, that's the Shein, Temu, little crappy stuff that they send direct. But actually, a lot of those products are sent in to Amazon in bulk. You're like, wait, but it's an $800 limit. How could they be sent in bulk? Well, the way they do it is, first of all, the government did not have a way of tracking what shipments were sent from the same seller at the same time. So they would break up into different shipments, but send many a day into Amazon and send every day. And if you send many a day, every day, you can actually get quite a lot of goods into the country by keeping it under $800. And secondly, they would lie on the invoice amount. So they would say it's $800 really, or $799, really it might be a couple $1,000s or even more. But because the process basically was a fast lane, nothing was inspected, they were able to bring in billions of dollars of goods tariff free. Now, where'd those items go? They mostly sold on Amazon. About a third of all Amazon merchandise is Chinese sellers. So those are not US entities with Chinese ownership. Those are actually Chinese entities selling in the US. About a third, and Amazon is about half of e-commerce. So it's dominated by these Chinese sellers. And part of the reason is that they're able to bring the items in tariff free. So the elimination of Section 321, the last day of it is May 1st, so really coming up really soon, is going to change the market and get rid of that big competitive advantage that Chinese sellers had and should never have had. So I'm all for competition. This was an unfair advantage that they had. And we're saying we're America first, so getting rid of that was good, but we should keep going. So there's two other ways that Chinese sellers commit fraud and benefit where US companies cannot. So they set up what is called an NRI, a non-resident importer. That allows Chinese sellers to bring goods into the United States without having an entity in the United States. How does that help them? Well, then they can lie on the amount of goods that they're bringing in, the value of the goods they're bringing in, and pay a lower tariff amount because the ramifications for getting caught are pretty low. They get a customs bond, which costs them $500. They bring in the goods, and if the value is wrong, there's no real major consequences for them. They simply set up another entity, a new NRI, and bring it in again. Versus an American brand faces legal liability, right? Both fines and even worse if they do it at scale. So American companies are much more careful. Therefore, they pay a higher percentage of the time they pay the actual tariffs than Chinese do because of the NRI. And we could eliminate non-resident importer or make the process different. The second thing is Chinese shell companies. So it is very easy in the United States to set up a new business entity, which is a good thing. We want to make it easy to do business in the United States. But because you can make it so easy to create a new entity in the United States, what Chinese sellers will do is they will commit fraud with the US entity, and if it gets shut down, they simply create another US entity. So again, while a US company would have a lot of risk, the Chinese companies don't. That's partially because they're overseas and partially because the Amazon brands, as you probably noticed, are just a weird string of characters. They're not a brand. So even if they have to shut down one that has, AZ111, they can do AZ113, and that's going to, it hurts them a little bit because they'll have to rebuild their listings and the reviews, but they can do it. Versus most of the American brands have a real brand, so they can't shut it down. So they're more tied to it. And again, because they're in the US, they face liability and they don't want to do that. So what should we do about it? We should make sure that the non-US companies, that they can still import to the US, but they're required to post larger bonds that are commensurate with the value of the goods they're bringing in. And we need to inspect those goods more thoroughly just to make sure they're paying the actual tariff amount. And if you don't believe me that all this fraud is existing, you could actually look at the percent of tariffs as a percentage of consumer spending. So that's been going down since COVID. So partially because of 321, partially because of fraud, the amount of tariffs we collect in the United States has gone down as consumer spending has gone up. Why? More fraud. So this is going to be good for the American e-commerce brands that can survive because they'll have less competition, partially because Chinese companies will have to play by the same rules, and partially because they're just going to move to selling in other countries, right? They don't only sell in the US. The US is the easiest market right now. Now that we're making it a little bit harder, they'll concentrate more on other countries. And we can go further again by eliminating the NRI, making sure that we're holding non-US entities to the same rules that we're holding US entities by increasing the enforcement, which is where the risk is. The downside of this is for the US consumer. Prices are going up. That's good for the brands. It's bad for the US consumer, and we will see shortages and stockouts in places that we probably don't expect, because there are clusters that are only served by Chinese sellers, and those clusters, some of them will disappear. So groups of products will disappear, and we'll find odd shortages in odd places that will take 6-12 months to fix. So I'm stocking up. Again, we should have done this better, we should have done this smoother, but it is what it is. That's the reality. If you're an e-commerce brand, you got to stick around. You'll get more pricing power. Just stay alive, and thanks for watching.